I'll tell you when it. Okay.
For what? No, we ain't doing that. Make them smoke.
Randy, you can go ahead and start.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. This is Randy in Black Women's Blueprint doing our book club, and I know this is our technically our first meeting because last week we had some technical difficulties, but we've got it worked out. Again, my name is Randy, and I'm from Atlanta, and I'm an intern for Black Women's Blueprint for the year, and I will be moderating with you tonight. Usually, it's both me and Michelle co-moderating, but today it's my turn. Any introduction from our book group would be helpful so everybody can know who's in the circle and who's reading and will be discussing with us tonight.
Hi, I am Michelle Odom. I'm here in New York at the Black Women's Blueprint offices. I am joined by one person.
Avril, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read the book since I wasn't aware of what was being read.
I need to turn off the YouTube page. Give me a second because it gives you the delayed sound.
Okay.
Anyway, we spent some time over the week trying to figure out, once again, how to get people into the space. I think we have figured it out. And if you receive the invitation on Facebook, if you look at the description of the invitation, there are some steps there to actually get into the Google Hangout space. And basically, after you receive the invitation and click yes, refresh your page and see where it says join the Hangout, and that will let you come into the discussion if you want to be in the discussion. So for now, it is Randy, Michelle, and Avril, and it looks like looks like we have a couple of viewers on YouTube, Randy, but I can't tell that they're trying to get into the space.
Okay.
So, okay.
Okay,
Back to you, Randy.
Okay, so we are reading At the Dark End of the Street, Black Women, Rape and Resistance, A New History of the Civil Rights Movement from Rosa Parks to the Rise of Black Power by Danielle McGuire. And our sessions it started June 3rd and they last until July 29th. They are from 6:30 to 8. So to jumpstart us off on discussions, last week we had some discussion questions towards the book and we didn't really get to talk about them. So I would like to start off by seeing how everyone feels about the fact that this author is a white woman. Does it matter that she is retelling this history as a white woman? Is this helpful as an ally? Or how did anybody feel when they found out that she looks to be a white woman? How did anyone feel about that?
Well, I don't know if April has any feelings yet. She's just becoming familiar with the book and what we're doing. So maybe it's up to you and me, Randy, to kind of tackle that question. I think for I, I think for me, um, when I first heard about the book a couple of years ago, and my first reaction was, that I'm in a frame of mind or in the mood to read a white woman's opinion about black women. And actually, I was in another online study group, and we were trying to decide what the next book was that we should read. And so this was one of the suggestions because the book At the Dark End of the Street was actually published in 2010. So I really, I kind of felt like I needed to get myself in a mood to deal with whatever might be the case. But I've I've uh, I've gotten there. I've gotten there. I've actually read the book already, and and I think she does a pretty good job of dealing with what is our history. It's still for me. I guess I guess I wonder why white people are seem to be so fascinated with Black history. Um, but in a lot of ways, it's our history. Our histories are so tangled up at this point, so interwoven at this point, um, that you really can't tell one story without telling the other. A lot of what she's doing in this book is talking about the behavior of white men. Well, that's her story. It's her story to tell. And, we happen to be a part of it. So I don't know. I'm okay with it. I wanted to create some space, though, in the group to have a few minutes to talk about this, because I think for different people, it'll bring up different issues. And I was hoping that we wouldn't have to talk about it every week.
Yeah.
Does it bring up anything for you, Randy?
Well, I had just heard about the book when Farah had mentioned the book club, so I had absolutely no idea that this book was out here, and so I had no idea that the author was a white woman or perceived white woman until you brought it up, Michelle, in the discussion questions last week. I had absolutely no idea, and when I started reading the book, I can't say I was skeptical. I've watched for a lot of our classes, when I was in school, like the Black Power mixtape. It was a white director or a Swedish director who produced that whole film, and so I had kind of been introduced to white people being the forefront of Black people having a space to talk about the history, and so I was more concerned about whether this book was historical or was she going to write this from a first person. Like when I was looking up this history, I felt like a white woman. Like I didn't want to really hear about how she was feeling during this, like while looking this up, because it's not about white people. It's not about her. And so when I read the prologue and the first chapter, I realized that it was very much straight to the point. It seemed to be very sincere and honest with the history that she introduced. Because I have never heard of any of this. I never knew that Rosa Parks was such an activist like she was. That's not what we're taught in school. That's not what I was taught, not even in college. And I thought I was getting the type of education that was cream of the crop, And so the fact that this book is 4 years old, and I've been in school for that long in college, I felt really, I don't know, I was really mad that I hadn't heard about this at all. I had absolutely no idea about this history. And so her being white didn't really take so much of a forefront as the fact that I was learning something about this. And at the back of the book, I seen the index. She cited all her sources, and it's given me the time and space to be able to look up this stuff on my own and to learn more than maybe what she could be able to put in a book, because I'm sure there are limitations that authors have in general. And so I feel like it'd be more of a learning experience. I'm not so worried about her being white as long as it doesn't come about how this history makes her feel. I'm not I'm not really into that. So
Yeah, great. April, do you have any thoughts about that? Just move on over a little bit.
Well, it's very interesting because I've never heard of this book, and I wish I was aware of what was being read, and just the fact that this person is a white person who's giving her honest perspective on the rape culture of white men. I feel like I'm missing out on a lot, and I really should have to take time and read this book. And also, I'm questioning why has African experience has been eliminated from the curriculum, the American educational system.
Right.
It could be a number of reasons. The shaming of our history. Wanting us to feel very shame and ignorant about our own history. That could be one issue. So I feel right now I'm feeling a little bit cheated.
Yeah.
And I wish I knew more. I mean, when I first came to the United States from Guyana, my parents really forced us to learn about African American experiences. I've read quite a few books on the African American experience. One book that I read was Death in the Promised Land, about the Oklahoma bombing, and a lot of the cities in Oklahoma and the villages, black community that was burned down in the early 1900s. I was also introduced to Henry Louis Gates Jr. at a very early age too, but these books were introduced to me by my parents or by African Americans in my community. And I always questioned why it wasn't part of the educational curriculum.
Right. Right. That's a great point. That's a great point, Randie. That even with you being in school, Randie just graduated from college. During the period that this book was on the market, that still it wasn't a part of your curriculum. So it brings up some feelings, but I think when when you realize that it's a part of our story that we need to know, whoever's telling it.
Right.
And as you said, Randie, just right from the very beginning, you start learning things, and that's kind of shocking, especially when you're like me and you think you know everything already. So I think maybe what we can do is, as other people figure out how to come into the group, because we're going to be playing with this technology, for the entire session, it seems like. We may just have to create a little space for people to air whatever they're feeling about that.
Okay.
The author discussed in the beginning of the chapter why she focused on the rape of African American women by white men.
No,
she never did.
She doesn't talk about her own motivations, which is one of the things that makes me wonder what they are. She's a historian, though. This is Dr. Danielle McGuire that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So it is a valid subject for a historian. So I don't know, Randie. Why don't we move on?
Okay. So now we are going to go into the discussions on the prologue in chapter 1, They Kill Me If I Told, and I created some bullet points about the prologue in chapter 1 for people who probably didn't get to read it all, or who just wanted to focus on main concepts. And so, Michelle, if you think it's okay, I can read through both and see for people maybe who haven't finished it or.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay. So for the prologue, the key points that I thought were important, in the prologue we get introduced to Reese Taylor, who is a black woman who was gang raped by 6 white men after leaving church, and this is how we are introduced to Rosa Parks, who as an activist and not just as the woman who refused to get off the bus. 10 years after this incident happened. We learned that Rosa Parks was a militant race woman, a sharp detective, and an anti-rape activist long before she became, like I said, the patron saint of the bus boycott. We learned that the interracial rape of black women was a strategy white supremacists used to instill fear, order, and to quiet resistance from black people. We learned that Ms. Taylor's rape was not unusual, especially during the Depression and the Jim Crow era. We learned that against common belief, black women were not quiet about being raped. And then Dr. Danielle gives a a review of some of the chapters in the book. And so chapter 2 and 3 reveal the history of the Montgomery campaign as a women's movement. Chapter 4 exposes the power of sex in maintaining the South's racial hierarchy. Chapter 5 discusses Betty Jean Owen's trial, who was a black college student gang raped by 4 men. Chapter 6 challenges the dominant historical narrative of the Mississippi freedom struggle, documenting black women's resistance to racial and sexual abuse. And Chapter 7 documents how white supremacists in Selma and across the South used the rhetoric of rape and miscegenation to resuscitate and revive massive resistance, underscoring the importance of sex and sexual violence to maintain white supremacy. So, Michelle or Avril, did anyone have anything to say about the main key points that I've just discussed in the prologue? If not, I can go into chapter 1.
I guess I would just add that one of the things that struck me in the telling of the story about Reese Taylor as she presents it in the prologue was just that when Reese was kidnapped or taken by the 6 white men, she was walking down a dark country road late at night with her 61-year-old friend and that friend's 18-year-old son. And so a lot of what stayed with me was what that must have also felt like for them.
Right. And the fact that we are taught, at least as women, part of rape culture is, don't walk alone. And she wasn't alone, and she was still kidnapped. So that was a big, that was hard to read as well. She was with somebody, with a man at that. Legally, he's considered, the 18-year-old was considered a man, so she was still not protected. So I thought that was something.
Yeah. Okay.
So chapter 1 key points. Titled "If They Told Me, They Kill Me If I Told." First point, we learn of Rosa Parks' family, her father, James McCauley, mother, Leona Edwards, and her grandparents. Her grandfather played a very instrumental role in her being such an activist. We learned that shortly after Reese Taylor was kidnapped, her family and community worked to save and find her. Reese Taylor's attackers were sought after and questioned, but were eventually released, free to roam the city, leaving Reese afraid for her safety. We learned that the Scottsboro case of Alabama was able to fuel the fire of Reese Taylor's case, as Alabama now had a bad reputation and were being watched nationally. We learned that soldiers abroad were angry at the mistreatment of Black Americans. They threatened indifference while fighting if the freedom and protection they were fighting for globally was not returned in their home country. We learned that Rosa Parks worked with the NAACP and a network of other newspapers, organizations, and activists across the country to get Reese Taylor's attackers indicted. Reese Taylor was able to have her attackers go to court twice, the second time with more evidence than the first. With a jury of all white men and a white judge, the men were never indicted. Reese Taylor and her family were moved to Montgomery and her husband given work because they were no longer safe in Abbeville. Throughout the chapter, we learned of other women who suffered interracial rape, usually by gangs of white men, who were raped after believing their assailants would give them work or offer them rides home. By the end of the chapter, the NAACP and other organizations must move on from Reese Taylor's rape and focus on others. But we are reminded that Reese Taylor's bravery to speak up sparked a movement that would highlight the sexual violence bestowed on Black women during the Depression, Civil Rights Movement, and Jim Crow. So anything from those main points from chapter 1?
Yeah, the one of the really striking things for me, I thought it was a bit laborious, the whole family history of Rosa Parks, family tree and everything, but what was really great about it was that it showed, just as Avril was just saying, it was in her family and it was in my family, where the sort of basis of our political education was found. And in the case of Rosa Parks, her grandfather on her mother's side,
Mhm.
but there were others who were very light skinned and had a whole history of interracial rape and consensual sex in their history going back to slavery. And so her grandfather on her mother's side um, had a real hatred for white people, even though he often passed as one. But he's the one that really instilled in Rosa the sense that you don't take bad treatment from anybody.
Right.
And so, yeah, that I thought that was a real key point of the chapter.
I was just very happy to learn so much about Rosa. It was a lot, you know. She got into the family history to me sometimes mid sentence of talking about Rosa or about a certain family member. But again, like I said, I hadn't learned much about Rosa at school or had ever thought to take initiative on my own because I thought that what I was learning was important. And so
Right.
it allowed me to see her as human, you know, as a woman, you know, she is married, she has a preference, you know, so it just made her a lot more relatable, um,
Yes.
you know, as a person by learning of her history and her grandparents, her you know, her parents.
Yes. Yes. You want to move on to questions?
Yes. Okay, so I have six discussion questions that I've written. We don't have to go in any order. Michelle, I don't know if you have it up on your end. Um, the question.
Yeah, we have them here.
Okay. Um, in case you want to look at a certain one first, then I can just start.
Your choice.
Okay. So we talked about it a little bit, but um, I guess I'll start with the first question. So, what were your initial thoughts, Michelle? I know that you've read this book before. I don't know, April, if you were able to finish, or I don't know how far you got, but the initial thoughts of learning of Reese Taylor and Rosa's involvement as an activist. Were you surprised? Have you learned this history concerning Rosa Parks and her work against sexual violence before? And I stated, I never have. I had absolutely no clue. But I tend to realize that whatever's kept quiet, probably kept quiet for a reason. So the lack of women that I've learned about concerning the civil rights movement, any of the movements in terms of black empowerment, always stood out to me. And so I always knew something was missing because I know enough men to know that men didn't do it by themselves because they can't, you know. So, um, I was very frustrated. I felt very cheated. I felt very stupid, you know, for not thinking
Yeah.
that, you know, for not demanding that somebody tell me something. It just never occurred to me, and it really scared me about how much I really don't know still,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
it was definitely an eye opener. The first chapter in the prologue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, don't be scared by that. You're going to be learning forever, hopefully.
Yeah.
Um, um, yeah. What's the question?
What were your initial thoughts of learning of Reese Taylor and Rosa's involvement, and were you surprised?
Yeah. Well, I had not heard of Reese Taylor's situation really at all. Actually, I had heard of her just recently. Um, One of the things that Black Women's Blueprint does is an annual event called Mother Tongue
Uh-huh.
Monologues, sort of like the vagina monologues with a Black woman's flair.
Mhm.
And so we've done it for 4 years, and each year it focuses on something different. So this year's event was focused on sexual violence
Mhm.
and several women that have experienced sexual violence gave their testimony, and there were some actors that read different pieces, poetry, and all that kind of thing. So one of the actors did read an excerpt from this book. about Reese Taylor. But at the time, and I'm talking just a few months ago, at the time, that was my first time hearing of Reese Taylor. And, obviously I had heard of Rosa Parks, but I really did have the image of, the famous, iconic image of her sitting on the bus.
Yeah.
Like the one story of Rosa
Yeah, yeah. And I really didn't know about her law. I did realize I had learned somewhere along the line that really there was more to the story than her just being tired one day and telling me to sit down. Um, but I got a lot more detail from this reading about exactly what kinds of things she was involved in, and so it was very illuminating. Yeah, yeah, and surprising.
It kind of makes you wonder also, like, what other lies are there about the teachers have told us, what other lies about our own history that has been eliminated from the educational system, but just continue to,
Yeah, well, there's an expression, something about the lion, the lion telling the story. It matters who's telling the story, which is, I guess, one reason why it brings up feelings that we have this white woman telling our story. But, certainly we can't expect white women or anyone else to tell our story our way. So it was surprising, Randie.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so how frustrating was it for you to see how much work it took across the country to bypass local authorities' indifference and neglect concerning Reese Taylor and the other woman we learned about?
You know what? Before we go to that question, I also wanted to say the piece in the telling of Reese Taylor's story about how once the sheriff called in the guy Hugo Wilson, which is the first person that Reese Taylor identified, and this guy, Reese Taylor, for April's sake, was gang raped by 6 white men. So she knew the car they had picked her up in, and she was able to identify the men, even though she didn't know their name. So when they brought in the first guy, Hugo Wilson, I think his name was, he admitted that he and his friends picked her up, took her out to some dark patch, but he said that they paid her for sex. And so the sheriff sent him home. No arrest, no, no nothing. And so, so that was pretty striking. There's also a term that came out of that section called alley bats that I had never heard. Have you ever heard of that, Randie?
Nope, I did not. But it sounds Southern, so.
Yeah, it does. And those are white men who prowl around looking for black women, either for coerced or consensual relations. So, yeah. And what's the next question?
I asked how frustrating was it for you to see how much work it took across the country to bypass local authorities' indifference in Abbeville, Alabama, concerning Reese Taylor and the other women we learn about?
I don't know. I didn't find that piece frustrating as much as I did empowering. I mean, I thought it was um, great. So this whole national campaign got sparked to defend Recy Taylor. Rosa Parks being the lead organizer, E.D. Nixon with the Montgomery. It wasn't called the Montgomery Improvement Association, but it was the precursor to that. I thought it was great that this was still a time in our history when Black people cared enough about each other and were in touch enough with what they were feeling to be justifiably outraged and willing to, do whatever they could to organize around it. So yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
But I didn't find it frustrating. I found it encouraging. What about you, Randie?
Well, that part, I thought was great that she was that the NAACP and Rosa was able to find all these people across the country in New York and Memphis to really stand up for Recy Taylor and to letters from soldiers and men who advocated for Recy as well. But I was frustrated because they kept bringing up Recy Taylor still had to live there. Her attackers were still walking through the city. Like she really wasn't safe, and it was really frustrating. Even though I know, obviously it's history, so it's over with. But like I'm on edge, like worried about her. Are they gonna kidnap her again?
Right.
Her, family. They lynch anybody for any reason, and so just, I found myself having a lot of anxiety trying to figure out how safe she was, and how unfair it was. But this is the history of this country, and so it is what it is. But I was frustrated, like, oh my God, I really don't want her to get kidnapped again. Like I just that's all I kept thinking about because I hadn't heard of her, so I wasn't sure how her story ended, until I finished the first chapter.
Yeah. Any comments?
No, well, I was thinking about, someone like Lindsay who, complained about being raped at the time. And I wonder often how white women felt about the rape of someone of another race, or even have, like, what was so discouraging for them to even acknowledge that they themselves may have been raped by white men. So I think about those questions and wanted to know, why they themselves maybe the courage to come forward and say, I'm a woman who experienced rape, and this is wrong. Why were they so afraid to even acknowledge that part of their experiences as well?
White women?
White women at the time, because I'm sure they have, there's some, they can maybe relate to some of the experiences that are similar.
Right.
The raping of Black women, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So that's the only question that comes up for me.
You have any reaction to that, Randie?
She asked why white women were silent and how they must have felt hearing about the rapes of Black women.
Yes.
Well, in the book, a few white women came out and white men came out and try to advocate for Recy, but not in a sense of standing up for her. But at one point, the sheriff and people had started saying that Recy was a prostitute and they hung out with bad people, and you had some white women and white men who were like, no, I know her, she's a good Negro. So in that sense, they spoke, but even then, there's definitely some racist undertones under that concept of being a good Negro woman. And the silence of white women didn't really shock me. I think maybe going to a predominantly white college traumatized community. So I wasn't really shocked to find that white women were silent at all. And I think that the fact that black people and at this really black women were seen to be less than and at the bottom of the bottom, you can't really feel bad for somebody being raped if you don't think they're women. You don't think they're human. And so I
Right.
didn't I didn't really so the silence of white women didn't really shock me, especially during that era when we're not even considered whole people. So I just thought it was the usual when I read that black people had to advocate so loudly and nationally because people in the town, white women and men in the town wouldn't speak up. So
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a mess. So do you think that the history of sexual violence coming from white men in power has something to do with black women distrust of authority figures, particularly police officers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, the sheriff knew who the perps were.
Right.
They admitted it.
Hmm.
um, and ultimately none of this led to conviction. Um, they did eventually arrest
Hmm.
them, and there was a trial, but none of it led to a conviction.
Right.
Um, so yeah, we don't have much in our history that would um, make us think of the police or authority figures um, as sources of justice or fairness or safety, or any of that.
Right. I asked that question because it just made me think of for my IS. I looked at how, which is a senior project that all seniors have to do. I chose to look at how lynchings provoked internalized racism, black, and, and what the constant rejection, death did to our psyche. And so books like this and history like this make me realize how much we have internalized, not just distrust for police, but anti-blackness blacks have with each
Right.
other. And just the difference between being one of those black people and being like not, and the our colorism issues that come up. And it just made me really think about how a lot of stuff don't leave us, even if we don't know. Like I didn't know the history of the sexual violence and how rampant it was. Obviously it was, but I had no idea that there was something there for me to learn. But
Right.
either way, I've internalized that fear of police anyway, and that fear of white men anyway, or just men in general as a woman. And so it really stuck out to me how something carry on with us even if we don't remember why.
Right. Because it's in our bones.
Right. And our grandparents pass it down, and like to keep us from playing in the front yard. My grandmother used to tell us KKK would come and get us if we didn't stay
Yeah.
in the back. I didn't know what KKK was, but she was referencing a few, years ago when all the children in Atlanta were murdered, and they blamed. I think they like convicted this black man, but nobody in the neighborhood believed it was the black. They knew it was KKK. They just knew it was, and my grandmother used that history to keep us in the backyard. And so little things like that stuck with us, and it just made me.
Right.
That's why I wanted to ask that question, pose that question.
Yeah. And as much as I know, I still don't have good sense. As you were talking, I was remembering an experience a couple of summers ago. I was staying with a friend, down on the eastern shore of Maryland. And I had gone out for a long walk on a hot summer day. And as I was on my way back to her house, a white man in a black SUV pulled over and asked me if I wanted a lift. Now I'm about to, I'm about to pass out from the heat. I don't have any more water. I just wanted to get home. And yes, I'm ashamed to say, I took the ride. And it was fine. He dropped me off. There was no problem. But boy, did my girlfriend and her boyfriend give me hell.
Right.
After that, I hear all about the KKK's history on the eastern shore of Maryland and all that could have happened to me. But yeah, you know, we've got this fear that we live with, and we don't even always know where it comes from.
I think I'm like you know, talking about it now. I'm realizing my own fear of traveling within the United States, and I think part of it has to do with the history of white supremacy and how they've treated people of color, you know, Black African Americans. And that could be one of my fear of, you know, going to a city where, you know, people still have the share these same ideologies of white supremacy and have to be safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's making sense now why I haven't, you know, taken the initiative to travel. I've always traveled outside of the United States because of, you know, the history of our people. It seemed like there's a positive history when they travel or their experiences in other countries. It's always positive, not within
the U.S. Yeah, and that was one of the things shocking to me about when Reese Taylor got picked up. It was Reese Taylor was 24 years old. She was with her 61-year-old female friend and the friend's 18-year-old son. They left church around midnight and were walking down a dark country road. And I don't know, I guess you did things like that down south in, what was it, 1944?
Yep.
But that to me was shocking. I mean, I can't imagine being on a dark road, dark country road now, you know, in this day and age. So, Randie?
Okay. So do you believe that there has been a shift in sexual violence? Are more black men and men of color attacking more black women and women of color than whites? Do you think this history of sexual violence has something to do with this violence in general?
Oh, you first. You first.
Well, I mean, honestly, before college, all of my villains have been black, men. You know, I think that's true for anybody in a community where people look like them. I think that violence from white students that I went to school with felt very different than violence from the black people I encountered while at home before college, but it was still violence. My attackers have been black, not white, not sexually, you know. But like, and again, I grew up in a predominantly black household, black community. Globally, country-wise, I hear more about attacks coming from men of color, black men, than I do from about white men attacking women of color and black women. And I don't know why. And as you can see in the book, you know, black men advocated and they protected as best they could, considering they were also black and could be killed for their resistance as well. And now, I don't know, I think that, like I said again, a lot of our sadness and hate has been turned inward, and we don't advocate and protect like we used to for one another. And maybe that's why, people get sick of Reese Taylor went through 2 trials, and her attackers still weren't indicted. And
Right.
people, I think that weighs heavy on people, and they're like, well, they start to believe, that Black women, aren't worthy of being protected, or aren't really women, so it's okay. And I think that we internalize a lot more than we say. I think that is why there's been, to me, a shift in violence.
Right.
So,
Right. Well,
Yeah, I always experience cognitive dissonance about, the of women. And I don't believe that, rape of women is just, it's one culture. I think, sometimes I question if it's something pathological about men who just, it's part of their DNA. I don't know. So I do question that, if it's something that's in their genetic makeup that makes them, violent.
right.
And then you have other men who have, don't have that,
Right.
that beliefs, that don't behave in that sense.
Mhm.
So sometimes I do wonder if it's something genetically.
Mhm.
You do have to question genetics and biology and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah. Um. Well, that's interesting. Um. I don't know. I guess like you, Randy. Really, most of the stories of sexual violence that I have ever heard about in my lifetime have been about Black men or boys um, raping Black women or girls or boys. Um, and and I did find it shocking um, to entertain the thought that something actually happened to bring a stop, it seems like, or to slow down significantly um, white men's rape of Black women. And it makes you wonder if that's true. You know, are white men still raping Black women and we just don't hear about it anymore?
Or is it on a different level? We really, micro level, we can't really quantify or identify.
Right.
So it may have taken a different form, a different shape.
Right. Right. But it almost seems as if all of the activism that occurred around Black women being raped, and this book goes up through the mid 70s. I don't know if you know of the case of Joanne Little. That is one case that I actually remember living through in the mid 70s. And so I don't know of any other famous cases of white men raping Black women since that time. I don't want to say that there haven't been any, because I don't know, but really all what I hear about are Black men raping Black women, and um, Avril raised the point about genetics, and I guess I've never really thought of it as a genetic problem. And I think, you know, what concerns me about that is the way white people have tried to use genetic arguments to describe black people as subhuman and all of that. But so I guess I'm more inclined to see it, I think, as you do, Randy, as our internalized hatred, self-hatred. So we have, all of this brutality that we experienced during the slavery years and the Reconstruction years and the Jim Crow years, and it's to a large extent as if the white man succeeded in convincing at least some segment of black men that black women are just not worthy of protection. So it's a difficult.
Yes, it's very complex because you think, even before slavery, what women, experiences like.
Right.
Is there a rape culture prior to slavery?
Right. I don't know.
Right. I'm sure there's empirical data that's out there, research is out there, but we haven't really addressed it or even look into it. Examine the history of rape prior to slavery.
Yeah. Well, certainly white women experience rape even today. So it may be.
In the book, Danielle says that rape was used, as a strategy to keep people down, and we know that rape is used for power. It has little to do about attraction. It's more to do about dominance and power. And I'm not saying that black women have not been raped by white men since she finished the book, or since the major case with Joanne Little. But I think it is interesting to look at the raping of black women from white men as a power thing, especially during the Jim Crow era, and maybe look at the reason why black men rape, which is more than likely a power thing as well for men who are often made to feel so powerless. Are not as manly. Not saying that rape makes you masculine, but rape is a power struggle, basically.
Right.
And I think it is interesting to see, or to ask, did white people win? Did they succeed in breaking us?
Right.
But I'm sure, sadly, that even before slavery, oppression of white people, that men rape women. But I think that the dynamic does change when you do include slavery and Jim Crow, Reconstruction and Depression era. So something to think about.
Okay.
Okay, so knowing what we know now about from the prologue in chapter 1, why do you believe knowing this history now is important? And what can we do, Michelle, maybe in Black Women's Blueprint or any of our other organizations, or just in general, with this history now that we know about it?
Randy, can you excuse me for a minute and you and April about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just repeat the question for me.
Okay. Knowing what we know now from the prologue in chapter 1, just basically by Reese Taylor and Rosa Parks and other sexual violent cases dealt with sexual violence of black women. Why do you believe knowing this history is important, and what can we do now with this history now that we know?
I think it's important for a culture, for society to acknowledge that there is a culture of rape or misogyny against women. I think it's important to educate our young, girls or young, females and male about the history of rape, and to at least have them be aware of it. I think awareness is very important, and then acknowledging that this culture does exist and has always existed, and maybe acknowledging it and having this awareness will open up more dialogue around the topic of rape against Black women.
Well, I definitely plan on. I've texted so many people and screenshotted this book. Read this book right now. Like making sure people know that it's out here. I plan on messaging some of my professors that I still keep in contact with to ask them have they heard about this book and its history. Because I do think it's important to talk about. My daughters and sons will definitely know about this history, and it's made me just want to be a little bit more proactive. And I guess double checking the history that this country obviously allows us to know, and seeing if there's anything else I'm missing. Because I obviously can't count on school to make sure that I know this, So it's just made me. If anything, it's made me more militant.
Oh, good. Okay, you ready for the next question?
Yeah, did you want to answer it?
What was it?
Knowing what we know now from the prologue in chapter 1, why do you believe knowing this history is important, and what can we do with it?
Oh. I think that knowing the history, I think even from the prologue in chapter 1, we are given an image of Black women as strong. I hear my Miss Sealy voice. We are strong. But you really get the image of Black women as strong and powerful and capable. As much as we were being raped and abused, we were also standing up for each other in powerful ways. As I said earlier, I think I said earlier, it must have felt so good to Recy Taylor and her family to know that there was this whole national campaign there to support them. I think you mentioned, Randie, that ultimately they left Abbeville. And they did it with support from the community, from the national campaign. So I think that white supremacy through and through is about making us feel powerless. Like even the point about how the white men picked Recy Taylor up, out on the dark road, accompanied by other people, which to me is a message to all of them, that you are powerless. You can't do anything about this. The sheriff doesn't arrest anybody initially. Another message of you are powerless.
Yeah, it kind of reinforces white supremacy ideology that the locus of the problem resides in the victim. Right. It's external.
Right.
It's external. It's not internal. It's not the victim's problem. It's broader. It's there.
Yeah.
It's on them.
Yeah.
It's on the person who's doing, the violating you.
Yes.
The person who's violating you. Yeah. So we want to have this at least have people or have these discussions so people can be aware that the problem it's just doesn't reside in them. It's external.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I think that the reason that you don't know this history, that I don't know this history, that we don't know this history is because knowing this history gives us a sense of we can do some things.
Right.
Not totally powerless. We're pretty amazing when you think about it. And so that's why I think that it's important that we know this history because we need all the reinforcements we can get that we do have the capacity for some agency in our own lives and our own community. We need to reinforce and counter all of the messages to the contrary that tell us we can't.
Right.
So that's why this stuff is not included in our school curriculums. What can we do with the history now that we know it? We can share it. We can spread the news. I mean, you made the point, Randy, that I guess it was almost odd to see black men as a part of the advocacy movement defending black women. And so our generation, not to say that you and I are in the same generation, Randy, but really, even from my generation, we're not used to seeing black men be our supporters. It happens. I say all the time that I had a really wonderful father, and I was blessed in that way. But for the most part, the other black men that have come through my life, I could pretty much live without most of them. And so from my generation, what we can see are the values and practices that we have lost as a community. So when we know our history, what can we do with it? I think we can share it. I think we can remind each other of what we're capable of doing and try to figure out, how to get back on a road where we can affirm each other. I also wanted, as a book group, I wanted us to read this book because so much of the work that Black Women's Blueprint does is about sexual violence and ending rape culture, and and I think we're remiss in doing that work if we don't have sort of the solid foundation that McGuire gives us in this text. So one thing we can do is arm advocates.
Right. Well, there was only one more discussion question, and we've been going back and forth actually over it. And that question was, were you surprised to learn of black male advocates concerning justice for black women? We've kind of touched on that a lot. I was incredibly surprised to hear. But of course, husbands will take up for their wives. Ideally, we hope so, and brothers for their sisters and cousins. But again, that's just not the stories we hear about. Usually, men, black men are telling us, be quiet, we're too sensitive. If we didn't dress this way or talk this way, if we didn't walk by ourselves. They're usually giving reasons for our rapes and our assaults rather than taking up for us. And so I was very surprised when I read that the soldiers had written letters and were threatening to not fight if they hadn't indicted Recy Taylor's rapist. And I was like, and I was like, okay, so those men were around. Maybe they still are, So and I did feel powerful learning that history, which is probably why I haven't learned it. So was it Anybody have anything else to say that we haven't touched on already about Black men advocating?
Well, I guess I wasn't as surprised. I would be surprised if Black men were advocating on behalf of Black women in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I was not surprised at all to see them doing that in 1944. In fact, recently, you've heard of Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative around Black men. And there's a group of 200, I think, Black men who wrote a letter to the administration saying that they believe that Black women and girls should be included in the concerns of the initiative. That was shocking.
Mm-hmm.
That was shocking to me. It felt good.
Yeah, like why they're invisible.
Yeah. But because of where I fall on the timeline, I still have vivid memories of Black men who were strong and protective, and that's not to say they didn't have their patriarchal ways, but certainly they were not the main ones disrespecting you. Now when we turn on the radio, anywhere, I don't want to say too much about it because I have not yet taken the time to listen to the entire sermon because I don't really want to. But the current controversy is about Jamal Bryant using the line "These hoes ain't loyal" in his sermon, and which is, I think, a Chris Brown lyric. So, I know we shouldn't say too much if we haven't listened to the sermon and really know the context, but, it does make me wonder, well, who's the leader? Is Chris Brown the leader? Or is the preacher the leader? I mean, where is it safe for a Black woman or girl to go without feeling like she may be verbally assaulted, if nothing else, by the Black men in her life? Even the Black men in leadership positions. And so no, I wasn't shocked by the 1944 Black men who were standing up for Black women, but I was saddened to know how much we have lost since then.
The ones who have so much hatred for Black women, you have to question, where is this behavior coming from? How was it learned? So understanding where it's learned, and if it's a cultural thing, if it's a culture that was developed to continue to foster hate towards women, particularly Black women. We want.
It's definitely learned behavior.
Concerned, and you wonder why it hasn't, changed, or when it's going to change, or if people are aware of it. Especially the young generation. If it's ever going to change. So that's to say.
Randie?
Yes. That was our last discussion question, actually. I know now that we need a moderator for next week.
Okay, well, you know what? I might have another question or two. Let me see.
Okay. Well, we have about, just keeping time, 9 minutes.
Okay. One question is, do we generally think of Black women as being powerful enough to launch national movements or spark international outrage?
Yes, I think I do.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
At least I know, at least like for my like mini bubble on campus, black women taking over. Like we irritate a lot of people, and I realize when people are annoyed with you, they tend to act quicker because they sick of you. And I think that we have the courage and the power to really to frustrate people into doing what we want, by also and also learning. I think that we possess a trait of rawness. Can't nobody really do nothing to me. I'm black. I'm a woman. So I might as well be honest. We just tell you how it is. And I think that we have a history of doing that. With Anna Julia Cooper, Angela Davis, all these women who are just like, I don't even care anymore. I'm gonna just tell you what it is, and you take what you want with it. But I think that it's not surprising to me at all now that I know about Rosa Parks and how much she advocated for women to see that she would do that.
April?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more advocacy that's needed around the issue, and maybe one of the reasons why we don't hear too many movement around campuses, could it be because of the shame that's around rape? Women, retreat themselves because they're so ashamed to even have a discussion about rape or even experiencing rape. So we have to find some ways of, having a platform, create a platform so women don't feel shame or around the issue.
Yeah. And that's what we are trying to do here. I mean, I think maybe the difference is because so much of what we're looking at is black on black, rape. Maybe that's why it's a more shameful thing. Certainly it was, it's always been a hard thing to talk about. But when you look at the examples of the women in this book, it feels like knowing that they had community support and that it was an outsider that they were complaining about, not their mother, father, brother, sister, not.
Rape can really silence, women.
Yeah.
Because women can actually go into total silence and speak about anything at all.
Like Maya Angelou. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me see. Oh, this was a point. She talks quite a bit about how the civil rights movement has been presented as a struggle between black and white men, but that the real story has not ever been written, and that the real story is that so much of what happened in the movement was sparked by cases of rape that created organizations that were then able to confront other things. And so I don't know. It strikes me as a fantastic claim, and I don't claim to be a historian. She does, and so maybe we should just say she's right. But I wonder, is that really true? I know that one of the things Farah feels about the book is that it doesn't give enough credit to black women that have written historical books about black women. And so I don't know. I mean, you're a more recent graduate than me, Randy. So what do you think about that?
Um, I mean, I definitely agree with. I do believe now after because she between the prologue and the first chapter, she names a lot of trials, a lot of sexual violent cases, pertaining Black women, and a lot of NAACP and SNCC and all those organizations that came out of the civil rights movement involvement. And so I do believe that I don't know if sexual violence of Black women was the main thing that sparked the civil rights movement, but it does seem to be right up there with it. So, um, in that way, I can't really disagree with her. But then again, I haven't. This is my first time really learning about sexual violence and how it was used as a strategy by white supremacists concerning Black women. And so I haven't read enough either way. And
Mm-hmm.
and even the Black feminist authors that I've read, like Deborah Gray White and Melissa Harris Perry, who came out with the Sister Citizen book. Um, the history when it comes to rape and sexual violence, the focus seemed to only be dealing with slavery. So
Right.
and not really with the civil rights movement or 60s or 70s. And so that's something to think about. So she doesn't mention from what I've read so far anything about Black women who've written on this topic. But from what I've read of Black women, I know I haven't read it all. The only cases of sexual violence that come up is out of slavery.
Right.
So this gives me more of a, I don't know. This teaches me that it lasted obviously way longer than slavery.
Right.
So
Right. So she may be right. So hopefully, Farrah's going to show up at one of our sessions, and let's remember to pose that question to
right.
her. um, okay, let's see. This is more of a I guess a philosophical question. As I said, it was her maternal grandfather that taught Rosa Parks not to accept bad treatment from anybody. And in her family, he's the one that introduced her to Marcus Garvey and the teachings and all that kind of thing. So what do we do to our children when we enforce our power and authority over them with an iron fist? Um, can we nurture more Rosa Parks? Do we want to nurture more Rosa Parks? But can we do it? Are we teaching? What do you think? How would you answer that? What do we teach our children when we enforce our authority over them with an iron fist?
You mean teach our children concerning history or sexual violence? Like which
How,
or the teacher?
how what are we teaching them about how to move through the world? Um, Sylvester Edwards was very clear. You don't accept bad treatment from anybody. That's where Rosa Parks learned how to stand up for herself and how to stand up for other people. And my family was very much the same way. Um, and it has stayed with me a lifetime. So when I see parents, and I'm in New York City, so it's overrun with people. And when I see young women, as I did today, just speaking very harshly to their young children, threatening them, cussing at them. Um, it's hard to imagine that kid's going to grow up to be Rosa Parks.
And we don't want to silence our young kids by mistreating them. Um, I mean, being a parent, being a black parent, and then we're taking many different factors and these are the larger system, environment, unemployment, poverty, stress on the body, stress on the mind, psychological and emotional problems for women.
Mm-hmm.
It's a burden. It's a wear and tear on the mind.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely don't want to act violently towards our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to be very patient and very gentle, and we have to also, educate them about bad touch and good touch, and to speak up because you have a voice. So I think it has to be something that we have to start having these conversations with our kids at a very young age, particularly about bad touch and good touch, and allow them to express themselves freely and not silence them. Maybe we'll have more Rosa Parks.
I hope so. I know you don't have any children, Randy, but do you have any feeling about that?
I thought that what you said was interesting in terms of you seeing young mothers or women in general being very harsh towards their children, and it made me think about I was just reading Bell Hooks' Sisters of the Yam. I think Sisters of the Yam, and she brought that up about how parenting black women tend to parent harshly, not because their child is bad, but because of how their child acting out is seen like through the public, like. You wanna prove that you're a good mother, that you're a good Negro woman, and so you have to make sure that your child is obedient, and docile, and responsible and respectful in public. And so again, I think that it's definitely easier said than done. But I honestly think that we as people, especially black people, internalize and project so much that we forget what the problem really is. Am I spanking my child because they're jumping up and down, or am I spanking my child because of how they're making me look to this couple sitting across from me? Because children, just from my cousins, my younger siblings, they're not really thinking about, am I making mommy look bad? It's not very, it's very self-absorbed. They're just in their own head. And I think that we have to be attentive and recognize when we are reacting out of projection, or when we're reacting, or are we reacting because this child needs to be disciplined. I was spanked as a child, and we laugh about the stories now.
And you turned out great.
Right, and I turned out fine, I think, but I don't remember being spanked just. My mom was a young mom. He was 17 and she was 15 when they had me. And so young parents, I think they have a lot of more pressure, and it seems and black women, we tend to have children younger, and so there's a lot of more pressure to make sure your child is a good child, because it's already a stereotype around you as a young black mother and young black parents. I don't remember really feeling like I was just getting hit for no reason, or being yelled at for any reason. And I think because they were younger, they understood when I was just being a baby and a toddler or a child, and just being inconsiderate. I don't know. I think that in terms of this history, I plan on, I didn't really grow up with black stuff. I don't know. My mom, she hated that my sister loved Barbie dolls, the little white Barbie dolls. But I think my sister loved the Barbie dolls more because they had mansions. They had toys and cars and stuff. And the black Barbie dolls, the hair was all messed up and you can't really comb it. And water touches it and you can't do nothing with it no more. You end up cutting it off. And for little things I saw there, but I think I really want to be more proactive in terms of showing them images, representation. I didn't really have a lot of representation, and I'm not blaming my parents for that. Because I don't think they did either. I don't think they really thought about it. But now I realize how representation, how important it is to see yourself in a positive image on TV,
Yeah.
and then your toys and then your books. And so I think that's one way that'll definitely that I plan on doing as a mother in the
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Okay. I don't have anything else.
Okay, well, now we're just a few minutes over, but that's okay. This should not take long. So selecting a moderator for next week, chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Um, Mike, you want to do it, April?
I would love to. However, I'm committed to so many things, military work, and I know I'm going to be away for some military duty coming up. So.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we're so glad. We're so glad you joined us tonight, really. And we've had a couple of viewers on YouTube, it looks like, but we didn't get anybody else into the space. So I don't know what we're going to do about that, Randy. I tried to put it out there that that I was willing to do test runs with people during the week, but except for the man Labib that contacted me, I didn't hear from anybody else. So I don't really know if people are trying to come into the Hangout or not. And I don't really know how I feel about just kind of being the entertainment for people.
Maybe, I was going to say maybe a questionnaire, like when people sometimes people get so busy during the week they want to go home and we ask them.
Yeah.
Then they may forget to have a discussion. So does the weekend work better?
Yeah, but
evening discussions work better.
But for last week we had over 100 people that have responded yes, and this week we have 20 something that said yes, and so last week was definitely a technical problem. This week I'm not so sure. But my experience with social media is that most people like to be voyeurs. And, and so, sometimes I feel like putting on a show and sometimes I don't. And
I know for me, I'm very shy when it comes to having my voice.
Yeah.
On internet. And,
I'm
just gonna go and say the right thing if I'm responding to the question appropriately and so.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not really shy. So, well, a little bit I am, but it's not that. It's it's just to me. Either people want to do this or they don't.
Right.
And I did a group on Facebook, and I did 2 different books. One book was Malcolm X, The Life of Reinvention, Manning Marable's book. That was a very popular group, started by Peter Matthews, and there were 3 co-facilitators, and we shared the facilitation with other members of the group, but there were like 600 people in that group. But on any given day, I'd say there probably were never more than maybe about 10 people that were active participants. Other people were just kind of there in the background. Then when we switched from focusing on a black man, Malcolm X, to focusing on a black woman, Rosa Parks, membership dropped to about 100 people. And still a very small number of those who were active participants. So I expect a small number to participate, but some.
Yeah, you would like.
And if we're gonna have none, then I have to to figure out how I feel about that. Anyway, Randy, I guess, I'll take on chapter 2
Okay.
until we can figure out what we're doing.
And I'm gonna get the book and read.
April said she's going to get the book.
When I have time, and if you still have a discussion, I will participate.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. And, again, people that are in New York are welcome to join us here at 279 Empire Boulevard in beautiful Crown Heights, Brooklyn. 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday. And I don't know, I think that's all I have to say, Randy.
Okay. Well, this was great. I enjoyed this discussion. I guess we will see everybody next week.
Thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
And thank you for moderating. Great job.
Thank you. Wasn't a problem. I guess we can take turns. If people don't, reach out and want to do it next week, the week after next, I can do chapter 3, and we can just go back and forth.
Yeah.
To share some of the work.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.